Great. Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll open this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission. First item of business is public comments. Do we have any folks wishing to share comments with us tonight, Rita?
I see one hand raised. Looks like John Paul. One moment, let me promote you to panelist, and you will have 3 minutes to give your public comment. John? There you go.
Okay, thanks for the time. I just have one request and then 2 questions as far as comments go. In regards to the Lake Point development project, considering that the deputy mayors and select city council members have used city resources to organize protests against the tenants and the property owners of the parcels that are affected by this development project, I believe they should recuse themselves from any comment or vote for reasons of conflict of interest. As far as the 2 questions, will the revised Lake Point project still require putting hundreds of piers into Lake Washington in order to sustain the building weight of the buildings that are in the proposed project? And is there an estimated time when an environmental impact study would be available to the public? And then last question, has an independent, meaning not from the city, economic impact study of current tenants, occupations, and impacting to the Kenmore community been compared to the proposed Lake Point project been conducted? And it appears as if we're losing high-skilled jobs for low-skilled jobs as kind of an incentive in addition to the housing. That's all I have.
Great. Well, thank you for your comments there, John. As far as answering your questions, I think Lake Point isn't certainly anything that's currently before our planning commission side. I'd certainly encourage you to bring those questions to the city staff and or the city council at some point. So thank you. Any other public comments, Rita?
I see no other hands raised at this time.
Okay. Next item of business is approval of the minutes. So we have before us the August 17th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion on those?
I move to approve.
Second. Okay, so we have a motion and second to approve those minutes. Any discussion on those minutes? Okay, I think we can do this by consent vote. So all those in favor of approving the August 17th minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the minutes are approved unanimously from August 17th. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
You bet. Go ahead, Dwight.
I would ask the Planning Commission's approval of my excuse for last meeting due to illness.
Absolutely. Do we need to do any kind of minutes, Lori or Debbie, on that, or read it, or can we just accept that as part of the record?
I think that's probably fine as part of the record. We have not historically indicated whether absences were excused or not excused, and certainly illness is a good reason for excuse.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, there is parts in the code that relate to this as far as excused or not excused. So I'm just trying to deal with that. It just be noted in the minutes that I was excused for the next minutes, this meeting's minutes, that I was excused for last meeting. That's all I'm asking.
Okay, duly noted, right, Lori and Debbie? Okay. Okay, thank you, Dwight. So our next agenda item is the revised vision statement, and I'll turn it over to Lori and Debbie for that.
Great. Well, I took all of your suggestions under consideration and tried to do my best. I hope I captured your interests with the vision statement. So if you'll note that primarily you would ask that the description of the community reflect that although we're connected to the waterfront, there are many other vibrant neighborhoods in the city. So that change was made in the introduction. And then the comment about financial sustainability was moved to the last paragraph in the vision statement as you had requested. And then other adjustments, again, I thought good detailed notes of what you were looking for, but this is your chance. If I've missed something or misinterpreted what you were looking for, please let me know. The next steps with this vision statement would be to put it with a big draft banner across it onto our website that basically says this is the draft vision statement that the Planning Commission is currently working with. It may be amended through the process.
Okay, anybody have any comments or questions for Lori on her her draft vision here?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
this is pretty minor, but I assume that staff will use their own judgment if they need to make minor modifications as they read through these documents as they get prepared. And in particular, in the second line of the beginning of the 20-year vision, you have offers ing. And so somewhere in there, I'm not sure what you wanted to say.
Yeah, the S has a strike through on it. It's hard to read because of the formation of the S letter, but that is a strike through. So it would say offering a high quality of life.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Tracy.
I really loved the addition of a variety of unique neighborhoods in the preamble. Thought that was a really nice way to capture that part of our discussion, that we are connected to the waterfront, but there is a lot more to us. So I thought that was great. I think that I was alone in this last time, so I'm not gonna belabor the point, but I do think for point one, taking out the word attractive, for me, I think there's something missing there. Like, I would love to have something there that acknowledges that we're the humanity of the people that we want to provide houses for. We're not like, so I don't know if that means, I understand the problem with attractive being subjective, and somebody else told me that it was too like market based, but maybe something like comfortable, I don't know, welcoming, I don't know, just something that kind of humanizes a little bit. I would love to see. And then for point two, I would love it if we could just say protects, kind of going back to what you had originally instead of is committed to, just because protect seems like a more active verb to me and more powerful. And then for me, it's still, that point still doesn't like encapsulate like the toothiness that I would like to see in terms of our environmental values. So I don't know if that's something that the community can weigh in on, and maybe that one could get revised further still through community input. But otherwise, I thought it was excellent. So thank you very much for the work.
Okay. Tracy, did you want to? Oh,
I was just going to ask her for exactly what she meant by that last piece. I was slightly confused, Tracy.
When I say toothiness, is that what you're confused about, Dwight?
Yeah, I'm just confused. I understand the protects piece, but it was the second part of that. What are you exactly? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I guess for me, it still doesn't encapsulate like the strength of the environmental values I think that we have in Kenmore. And I think that we need to cultivate more of. So I think I'm looking for language that moves us toward like a deeper connection to place and a greater understanding of our reciprocal relationships with other species and the natural environment. So something that really grounds us in our natural environment, because we need that natural environment to be healthy and thriving ourselves as humans. So I guess I'm looking for something that's like kind of toothier in terms of like our commitment to protecting the environment, and also that kind of cultivates this sense that this is an important part of who we are, and having it be healthy is an important part of us being healthy. It's something that kind of gets at that is what I guess I mean by toothier, stronger.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Tracy, I was going to ask if you had specific, first, an adjective for the, maybe potentially a substitute or for attractive, and also, I guess in your second bullet point there, it might help us to consider this if you had, again, sort of specific language that you would, I guess, propose for it would help me, I should say. I shouldn't speak for the others, but it would help me if you had perhaps some specific ideas on those.
Yeah, sure. For the first point about encourages the diversity of well-maintained housing types, I personally don't mind attractive. I understand that I think I was like the minority opinion there. I think the rest of the commission felt pretty strongly that it needed to go. But for me, what that word does is it kind of gets at, like, we're not just providing housing. Like, we're providing places that people want to live, that feel comfortable for them, I guess, is what I was trying to get at. And the only other word that I could come up with that wasn't attractive was comfortable. But I don't know that that is perfect either. So I guess that's my suggestion right now. But I don't know that it's my very best suggestion that I might come to if I had more time to think about it. And then for the second point, I didn't want to wordsmith it because I didn't want to overstep. So I guess I could just talk a little bit more. I feel like the natural environment is really integral to our sense of space. And I feel like, I think it's something that the indigenous peoples who lived here had cultivated really well through their culture and that we've lost a little bit of. And I would love to infuse that back into our story, that the natural environment of the place where we live is important because it's important for our own health as human beings and our ability to thrive. So that's what I was trying to get at there. And again, I didn't wordsmith it. Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. On the first phrase, I looked at every synonym I could find for attractive and I couldn't find anything. So comfortable may be the word that you are interested in if attractive is not sufficient, and the rest of the commission will need to decide that. I have a suggestion potentially for the second bullet. So it would start again with protects natural and environmentally sensitive areas, significant open space, trees, air and water quality, and healthy wildlife habitat, knowing that a healthy environment is important for human health. Would be a potential addition, not necessarily, I'm not saying that that is appropriate for the whole commission, but I was thinking it might get to your point.
Yeah, maybe something like restoring and protecting our environment supports the health, well-being, and resilience of humans and other species in our community. Something about that. Thank you for considering all this.
Well, we'll need the rest of the commissioners to weigh in on that.
Mike, go ahead. I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, just going back to the first bullet, I have no objection to the choice of attractive. In fact, I think it actually helps make the rest of the phrase more meaningful. When we talk about well-maintained, which I think is a good add in there, that in my mind begs for a standard. And I think choice of attractive, the word attractive, I think provides that. So it's how other people think, but I'm happy to have a choice of attractive back in there.
Go ahead, Dennis, and then Dwight.
Tracy, just another possible synonym to use for attractive might be dignified.
Dwight, go ahead.
How about the word provide welcoming living accommodations? It's a little more global.
I guess I feel like we should should put what we have out for the community and get their input. I think we can wordsmith this to death, and I think it would be great to get input from the rest of the community so that we get words or sentences that represent a broader group than just ourselves.
Personally, I would agree with that for the first bullet point, but I do like what Tracy's suggesting about, making some kind of connection between, the environmental sustainability and human life. And I guess I don't have brilliant wordsmithing at the moment myself, but I do like making that connection in some way. So I'm sorry, I don't have any specific words that are coming to mind, but. So.
If it would be helpful, the notes that I have are basically the things that I've already said, but I'm happy to type them and send them to everybody if that would be helpful and not out of bounds for protocol.
I would agree with that.
So I think we can move forward in a couple of ways. It would help me to know whether Suzanne's perspective, which is to keep the first bullet language as is preferred, or whether the commission would prefer to go back and use a different word, as yet undetermined.
Well, I don't know that we need a vote on this. I would agree with Suzanne on that first bullet and let get some other ideas from the community on that.
So I see two of you supporting that position. There's a third one. There's a fourth one. Okay, so for the first bullet point, we are going to leave it alone for now. And I have a list of the words that you brought up tonight. And we'll see after the public input what needs to happen to that. Either it's changed or we have a different approach. The second bullet point, we can do a couple things. We could add language as Tracy suggests to the second bullet at this time. We can have Tracy submit to me her thoughts, which I could then send out with the commission with a potential rewrite to bring back at a future meeting, maybe next time, but maybe the time after, because we have a really full agenda next time, with maybe a suggestion for an edit.
I'm fine with that idea. Presuming, again, we'll have a chance to kind of look at it and think about it and see how it works and discuss it. I'm good with that.
I agree.
Okay. So Tracy, if you want to type up your comments and send them to me, and then I will send them out to the rest of the commission to avoid that communication issue. And then having your thoughts in hand, I will try to craft, or if you have a sentence that's crafted, we can work on that and bring that back probably at your second meeting in October. Does that sound okay?
I will do that. Thank you. Everyone.
So anybody else have any thoughts on the sort of redrafted vision statement for us to think about tonight? Go ahead, Mike.
First, let me just thank Lori and Debbie. I think you did a great job, given how complicated this is and how easy we made it for you. I wanted to speak to the 9th bullet that begins supports. I like the keeping in the character there, supports the character of its residential neighborhoods. I think that adds a stronger sense of what I think our goal really is here, what our vision is. And I also suggest that we separate the second clause here, and provides opportunities for residents to meet their daily needs locally into a separate bullet. I think those are two separate ideas, and I think given some of the controversy we've already heard in discussions about inserting commercial enterprises into the residential neighborhoods, that putting those two together seems to foreshadow that sort of decision. And I don't think we're there yet. So separating those two out, I think would be helpful.
Anybody have thoughts on that? Any others?
I have a thought if commissioners don't. Commissioners should go first.
Well, I support what Mike said about dividing that bullet point.
I could also be in support of dividing them into separate thoughts and bullet points.
Yeah. Good with that.
Sounds like it's unanimous.
And I also like maybe the re-inclusion of characters, because supporting its residential neighborhoods doesn't really say a lot compared to supporting the character. And that may be a little bit loaded. You know, the character, does that mean there's no, no possibility for change? But I guess it's broad enough that it wouldn't necessarily prohibit us from our exploring of the missing middle and, things of that sort. So it's a vision statement. So it can be
So
readily.
as staff, I would like to push back a little bit on character, and I'll tell you why.
Sure.
And you
Okay.
obviously are the decision makers. So character of residential neighborhoods is often used as a way to say, we want to keep our neighborhoods the way they are with no change, and no one who is different is living in our neighborhoods. That it's kind of a buzzword. And I'm just telling you what the tone of this discussion is regionally. That's supporting the character of a residential neighborhood is supporting the notion that others may not be welcome. So I would encourage you to talk about what you mean by the character of the neighborhood. And if we can revise this phrase to identify those features that we want to support, I think it would be stronger and more understandable and not have that possibly negative connotation. So what do we mean by character? What does that mean?
I agree with Lori's assessment of what character has often meant when we talk about neighborhoods, and in particular single family neighborhoods. And I do think it's worth having a very thoughtful conversation about that. Maybe this is just maybe a point for clarification for me, Lori. As I was reading through the housing element that you shared in our packet for this week, I was actually surprised to see that phrase used. Mm-hmm. And I think it came either from the regional level of planning, or I don't know if it came directly from the GMA or not, but I was surprised to see character of our residential neighborhoods in there. So it
in the housing
indicated
element
to me that but I think it came from a higher level of planning than ours. And I know that document, I think, was from 2018. Is that correct?
The amendments were done in 2015.
15. Okay.
The final. There have been some amendments since 2015, for example, related to manufactured housing communities. So okay. There have been a few slight amendments since 2015, but the bulk of the element was adopted in 2015.
So is that, is this a discussion that's happened since then in the larger community? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I definitely would say so.
All right.
Right. And it's prompted by discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the notion that sometimes preserving the character of a neighborhood is a code word for saying something different shouldn't happen here. And I'm not saying that that's what was meant ever in Kenmore's comprehensive plan. I'm just telling you that that is a potential perception. And by identifying what the features are of character, we can get around that. I mean, I know what you mean. I think you want pleasant, welcoming, carefully maintained neighborhoods. I think that's what you mean by character, but we've never explicitly talked about what that means. What does that mean?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Bottom line here is, I think this is something that maybe we need to come back to after we've had the missing middle and some other discussions, because I think that that has a huge impact on what a character of a neighbor could be, and that's basically what comes to my mind. Is I want to understand that a little better before I were to sign off on this particular phrase as it stands. Now, we've got a lot of terminology in here already, and I think we've been pretty clear about diversity. We've stated that several places. We've talked about welcoming. We have all of this in here, and all of those things to me speak to the character of a residential neighborhood. So I don't feel that that confusion is there. I know we're in a time where there's a hypersensitivity to using certain terms and a preference to use other terms to mirror that. I just don't want to lose the sense that a residential neighborhood has a character that's different from other types of neighborhoods, or actually not necessarily neighborhoods, but from other zoning areas. And so that's what I'm looking for here. And we may be able to define that a little better after we've gone through some of the rest of our discussion. So I'm happy to leave it as it is for right now, but just as we've said in a couple other places, we circle back here after we're more clear about what our vision really is, and then maybe we can be more explicit about what we want to protect or what we want to preserve in the residential neighborhoods.
I would agree with that. I'm just looking at Merriam-Webster and the definition of character, and it much of what's in there could be interpreted in a negative way. So I would be in favor of revisiting that phrase later. One of the words it has in here is personality, but even that I think is a little charged. So I think this would be a good idea. They talk about characteristics, which is a little less charged, I think, than character. If you can list characteristics, you know, that of the neighborhoods, kind of to your point, Lori, what do we really mean?
Yeah, and it may have to do, as we talk about missing middle housing, it may have to do with scale, it may have to do with size. I mean, it can be so many different things, but I think without a clear understanding of what it means, given, as Commissioner Vanderlyn says, things are charged right now, we may want to say more specifically, here's what we mean, this is what we want.
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
And I mean, to support that idea, Lori, but to take it, I think, a step further, is that things are charged right now for a historical reason. And I think it behooves us to be really conscious of what those reasons are when we're choosing our language, because that's the meaning of things is rooted in not only our dictionary meanings, but how things have been used historically and what they have meant historically. So I think that's a really important conversation to have. So, and so that we can avoid, so that we can, remediate some of the mistakes that we've made through our zoning in the past that have been exclusionary, and also avoid making those same mistakes again.
So I think what Commissioner Vanderlyn was suggesting, and I think I heard agreement, was that we will leave this for now, but we definitely want to circle back with a discussion about what we mean by character after we talk about, for example, missing middle housing.
Yeah.
Is that?
Well, I'm not sure if I heard that quite that way. I think that the question for us is, what does circle back mean? Are we going to circle back once, at least when you come back with that other language up above, and just make sure that we're comfortable with leaving or whatever it is now, and then that we would leave it open for further amendment after public input? Or do we want to do something now? I'm not sure I heard a clear agreement on that issue. And then once you're done with that, I would like to discuss the issue about needs locally. So once this is done, I'd like to talk about that.
I'll jump into the first part of that. Bottom line is I don't think we're ready to sign off or make a recommendation on this particular point yet. I think we will be after we've gotten public comment and after we've had a chance to go through the further discussions, including missing middle, but also in general, what we think our vision of the residential neighborhoods look like in the future. We're not there yet. So when I say circle back, I mean before we sign off on this, after we've had that input and after we've had that those discussions, we would come back and say, okay, what do we really mean here? What would be useful language here to communicate what we really mean when we're talking about supporting residential neighborhoods? I don't think we're there yet, and we won't be there until we get through that process.
So I'm wondering then if, you know, I've heard the changes, and hopefully in a couple meetings we'll have a resolution to Commissioner Banaszynski's suggestions. Perhaps what we could do, I'm just throwing this out here because I don't want the vision statement to wait till 6 months from now and we're ready to adopt and we have no vision statement. I'm wondering if what we could do is at the end of the statement, flag some of the issues that the commission is still pondering. So for example, the commission is still considering whether a choice of attractive living accommodations is appropriate. Another option might be to use the word comfortable, dignified. I mean, we can basically say what it is that you're considering. And for the one about protection of natural environment, the commission is considering whether a stronger statement that speaks to the importance of the environment for human health and our role in the world is important. And for the character one, we say the commission is still discussing what is meant by the character of residential neighborhoods and trying to determine whether character is the appropriate word or there is some other approach. How does the commission feel about that? That'll give us some opportunity for directed public feedback.
That was my question, Lori, is if this would be just shared with the city council, or if this would be part of one of those community meetings where people can come in and you know, put sticky notes with their ideas and so forth.
Yeah, I had not anticipated taking it to the city council at this point. I guess I had anticipated putting it on the webpage about the comprehensive plan update. And then as we move through our public involvement activities over the next couple of months, sort of flagging that as an outstanding discussion point with feedback to be given to the commission. That's what I was thinking of.
That sounds very good to me, Lori. Maybe as a clarification, when I think about that first part of that phrase, what I'm looking at, first of all, is the first word, supports. And I'm trying to think through my mind, what is it we support? Mm-hmm. And character may not be the right word for it, but I think we need to come to specifics. And I think maybe this is where you were going, Lori.
Yeah.
We need to be more specific about what that means. Otherwise, that phrase means nothing. Support residential neighborhoods. What does that mean? Streets? More pavement? Yeah. What does support a neighborhood mean?
Right.
I'm not sure. If we're going to have that phrase in there, which I think we do, because I think there's an intent there that's important to have in our vision and explain in our vision. But I don't think we have a good description of what that is yet. And I'm not sure that we will until we've had particularly some more community input to understand in your sticky notes or you know, what's one of the questions would be. What sort of support or do you believe we'd like to see from the city in support of your neighborhood? And fill in the blank. Then we'll be able to answer that question and have a meaningful discussion. I don't know what that is right now.
So how about this? So Commissioner Bonashinsky is going to send me her comments about that one bullet phrase. And I'm going to take the vision statement and I'm going to try to write a little thing at the end about ongoing discussion. Of course, people can comment on the whole thing, but these are issues that the Planning Commission is really struggling with at this point. And then I'll bring it back again, probably the second meeting in October, to make sure that I've phrased it. I've expressed your intent, and then we'll post it and invite public comment on it. And I should add, Debbie is probably going to say this at some point, but the bad news is that we are in a virtual environment until January. That decision has been made, which means that our public involvement is going to be virtual, as you all mentioned last time. So we are now in the process of working out what that's going to look like. It won't be someone coming to City Hall to put a sticky note on, which would be so much easier. But we're talking about different online strategies, discussion opportunities, etc. More to come on that, but just a heads up.
Yeah, I think Dwight, did you also want to weigh in on, you had about the daily needs? Did you want to bring up something about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In addition,
thank you very much.
I assume we're done with the other, yeah, we can move on from the other very good discussions too, but.
Well, yes, and I was going to make one last comment about what Lori was saying, is that I would state it much more strongly, is that the commission has not made any decisions on the final form of this vision statement. I mean, I would just start right up front with that. And the commission is looking for input from the public, from our residents, with regard to elements of this vision. We are particularly looking for issues related, comments related to, and then spell out which ones. That's what I would suggest. I think we need to be very clear that we have not made any decisions and that we are open for input. The other item is that, the question about locally could be viewed two different ways. It could be viewed in the way that has been discussed about having corner stores or all of that kind of thing. Or the other way to look at it is locally, maybe down in our downtown area. Locally is that we have the stores and the shops that are necessary, so people don't always have to go into other communities or downtown to Seattle or to shopping centers to get something. Not to say that we have to have everything, but maybe locally can be defined a little differently than just what might be taken as the residential commercial spotlights. So I just wanted to point that out, that that can, there's different ways of looking to the definition of locally.
Yeah,
I agree with that, Dwight. Dwight, I think that's, you've actually laid out what I think is going to be a major discussion point for us in the future. I think those are two different, potentially different views of how you zone and how you use land use. And I think that's a discussion that's important for us to have. And it may not be a pure, it may be a blend that we come up with eventually. But I think that that's a very important discussion. And again, it's another one we're not, I think, ready to come out with a firm position or recommendation on. So I also support what you said earlier, Dwight. I think what we've got here is maybe the framework for future, particularly community discussion. But a lot of this is going to have to wait until we have further consideration of this and input before we would finalize it. Or at least for myself, I would feel comfortable saying that this was a good vision.
Yeah,
and certainly that it was a shared vision.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Laura, I was just curious, what was your intent with the phrasing of that particular the second clause of that sentence.
Yeah, I have no intent. I think that phrase came directly from Nathan Lutz's.
Okay.
And that the ambiguity of locally was a deliberate choice, if I recall.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, clearly we need to put that in the corner for further consideration.
Yeah,
I
I
think
put a
so.
star by it, and we'll
Yeah.
tackle
Yeah.
that in the same way as the other topics.
Yeah. Will anybody else have any, specific bullet points or items they want to flag at this point or discuss? This has been, I think, really a very good discussion about some really key points and wording and issues. So, anybody else have anything they want to share about that? All right, I think we're ready. So, Lori, we'll plan to revisit this in, like you say, probably October, huh?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, the next item is the I'm sorry.
Housing data.
The housing element background information. Okay.
Yeah, right. So in your memo and in attachment 5, we tried to provide relevant housing data. And some of this you had already seen. I pulled it in from earlier packets, agenda packets. Some of it in attachment 5 particularly you have not seen previously. And I'm so happy to see that Mike Stanger with Arch is here because he's our data guru. And I know you're going to ask me a question that I won't be able to answer, and then I'm going to turn to Mike and hope that he knows the answer. But there were a lot of charts and a lot of tables. And so what we have tried to do is to put that information in some sort of a context to try to identify highlights from all of that data that we thought might be useful moving forward. And so we have a little PowerPoint presentation that's our effort to generate discussion or provide background for future discussion. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen, always a challenge, and then we'll run through some of this data. Okay, so I think you can see my screen, and here we go. Maybe, there we go. Okay, housing data highlights. And you'll be interested to note that we've tried to use our logo here. We're trying to be really careful about branding the comprehensive plan update so residents will see, this is all the same project, even though a number of different things are being discussed. But with that, information on household incomes. Again, this information is in all those charts you received, but we've tried to put it in some sort of a grouping or an order that helps frame what we're going to be talking about. So 20% of Kenmore households have a household income that's less than 50% AMI, and that AMI is average median income, King County average median income, and that's the way we assess affordability is through AMI. So these are extremely low and low income households. 15% of Kenmore's housing units are affordable. If you think about using 30% of your income for housing expenses, 15% of Kenmore's housing units are affordable to households at this income level. So what does that mean? It means that this notion of cost burden is a major concern. So folks are spending more than 30% of their household income on housing because housing is expensive. Looking at the age of the population, our population is somewhat older than the counties, but most interestingly, there's a significantly lower percentage than the county in the 20 to 34-year-old age group, so young adults. There has been a steady rise in preschoolers, but declines in school age and the 35 to 49 age groups. Elderly non-families have the highest rate of severe housing cost burden. Severe housing cost burden means you're spending more than half your income on housing expenses. And an elderly non-family is either a single elderly person living alone or a single elderly person living with others who are not relatives. Kenmore continues to diversify in race and ethnicity like the rest of the country, and households headed by Black, Indigenous, and people of color are cost burdened disproportionately to their numbers. So if you were to look at the cost burden numbers by race and ethnicity, you would see that those numbers are higher for these groups. Household types. So large families, which are 5 or more related individuals, have the highest rate of housing cost burden for all Kenmore households at 50%. That's different from extreme severe cost burden, which we talked about, the elderly, those households being in that category. But this is housing cost burden generally, so paying more than 30%. Non-families also are more frequently cost burdened. Again, non-families are either someone living alone or someone living with unrelated persons than other household types. Housing tenure, it talks about renters versus owners. So nearly 73% of Kenmore's housing units are owner occupied and 27% are renter occupied. And that's not a split between apartments and single family homes. It's the more generalized split, including renters who may rent single family homes or owners in, for example, a condominium. So looking at the housing stock, about 2/3 or 3/4 is in 1-unit structures, 72%. 24% are in buildings of 5 or more units, those buildings downtown primarily. And only 4% of the city's housing units are in 2 to 4 unit structures. So that's the missing middle. And that's a pattern you see throughout this region, that it's high density or it's low density, and there's nothing in the middle. In terms of that housing stock, most of the owner-occupied homes are larger. That makes sense, with 3 or 4 bedrooms. Most renter-occupied homes have only 1 or 2 bedrooms, and that's interesting when you look at the composition of families. I haven't gotten into that information here, but there's sometimes a mismatch. Older or families with children who need larger units, but those larger units are most typically in single family homes, for example. And then as part of the countywide planning policies, they asked us to look at housing, sort of housing quality. The only data that's really relevant to that is whether complete plumbing and kitchen facilities are available, and Kenmore is really scoring here. 99% of housing units have these features. Looking at zoning and transit, 78% of land in Kenmore is zoned for exclusively residential uses. And I want to qualify that a little bit because you can do other kinds of things in some of the city's residential zones, but primarily it's the single family and multifamily zones. And of that land, 95% of it is zoned for single family development. The rest of the land is in things like parks and right of way and that kind of thing. Or mixed use. And there's a significant percentage, but not nearly as much, of land zoned for residential uses where you can build multifamily development as part of mixed use. And then there are 2 frequent transit corridors in the city. And I've attached maps, and we're in the process of identifying what capacity is available and how many units are in these areas. But the Puget Sound Regional Council has identified these 2 corridors along SR 522 we certainly knew about. But the other corridor is along Juanita Drive, Northeast 155th Street, and 84th Avenue Northeast. So the maps at the end of attachment 5 show you the areas along with the zoning of a 1/4 mile and a 1/2 mile from those transit corridors. So we've talked before about city responsibilities, and they do address housing. The countywide planning policies set out a regional expectation. This is what they did also with the last update for housing unit percentages at different AMI levels. And this time around, that expectation is 15% extremely low income, 15% very low income, and 19% low income housing units. Kenmore's current percentages are 3%, 12%, and 14%. So you see, certainly the biggest gap is at the 3% level. And as we know, there's really not a zoning solution to providing housing units for extremely low income uses. So that ends our little summary of the data. And if you have questions or comments or thoughts, this is supposed to be sort of a precursor to discussions we'll start next week, in fact, on the whole missing middle housing topic.
Yeah, anybody have questions or thoughts? Again, as Laura indicated, anybody want to? Well, I guess I'll start with a maybe clarifying question. It was on, let's see, I think page 3 of the, page 11 in the packet, page 3 of the memo, and it talks about Kenmore residents who work in Kenmore, and of those, 13.9% work in Kenmore and 86.1%. And this is a significant change from the 2015 analysis. I take it that's a change in terms of more people working in Kenmore. Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
In the last census, it was 3%. So
it went from 3 to 14?
Right.
Or
now, mind you, that those numbers are from the American Community Survey, which is an estimate based on a 5-year range. So at some point here, we'll have new 2020 census data, and it'll be interesting to see whether, in fact, that really does, that change really is present. But we don't have that census data yet. And this is one piece of information, for example, that the countywide planning policies ask cities to look at. We included it in the comprehensive plan last time, and it gets to the whole notion of jobs and housing. Where are the jobs? Where's the housing? Yeah. So it indicates that by and large, Kenmore residents commute to jobs outside of Kenmore.
So the 2020 census data, I mean, I'm just trying to think how that may incorporate, pandemic-related changes. Because the actual census was pretty early in the pandemic, wasn't it, that people actually answered those questions. So I'm just kind of curious if that will be incorporated in the next update.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they're going to do some kind of a control for that, or whether the question was phrased. I didn't fill out the census data for our household, so I didn't even see the form.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mike, if you have any intel?
Not really. I have been reading that the American Community Survey that was taken during 2020 is going to be is really struggling with some reliability problems because of COVID, but I haven't heard anything specific about census data. Because we haven't really gotten our hands on that. They just released some of that data for redistricting today, I think it was, but we won't, it'll be a while before we get the really good stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sure the census will probably, lots of people will have this question, and you would think that they would publish something that would speak to how they addressed the question of the pandemic in their work. I would hope, anyway.
Other people have questions or thoughts or? Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, this is maybe where we, or at least I could use some help from staff. When I look and listen to a lot of the numbers that are coming out, all good information. What I'm never really quite get my hands around is what are our targets? We have some input from the growth management. We have input from several other places. And sometimes depending on where you look, it looks like there's a significant gap. If I look at Kenmore, for instance, compared to East King, I don't see that big a gap. So I think at some point we have to understand before we get into discussion of missing middle or how much more affordable housing we need to create over the next 20 years. I think we need to have an idea of just how big is the apple here. And I don't have a real good feeling for that. So if you could give us some idea on that, particularly adding in what I think we've already did at some point in the past, given what we've already allocated in our land use planning and zoning, particularly looking at multifamily and some of the others, if that were beyond, how much beyond what we've already allocated is out there that's a gap? And particularly how that might, go ahead.
There's no gap.
There is no gap.
We easily under current zoning meet our targets, our 20-year targets. There is no capacity issue, but that is capacity for housing units. That's one thing. On the other hand, there are the issues of affordable housing, and that's very different. And so the county has given every city percentages. If every city in the county will meet these percentages, and that's where the 15%, 15%, 19% came from, we would have enough housing units over the 20-year period to accommodate all of folks of all incomes. And the way they've structured that is that there are some communities, South King County, for example, that are doing great. They've got more housing units for lower income folks. And so their responsibility is different from Kenmore's responsibility, which is to say, okay, we have a shortfall here, and so we should be addressing it. And then a new wrinkle has come into play, which is that the Department of Commerce is supposed to give us, I think, actual numbers that we are to achieve at different income levels. And again, I'll turn to Mike and ask if he has any more information about that. Commerce hasn't come up with those numbers yet. We don't have them.
Actually, I'm afraid to say that I hadn't heard that about Commerce.
It actually was it's in a bill that was just passed in the last session that directs Commerce to give us numbers. So not only do we have the countywide percentages, but the state is supposed to be telling us exactly what our affordable housing numbers should be. So again, we don't have a capacity issue. What we have is a responsibility related to more affordable housing. And then if there are other, a diversity of housing types is something that the Growth Management Act supports. New language has been added that we're supposed to provide capacity for middle duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, because we're in the urban growth boundary. So there are other kinds of responsibilities that are weighing on us as we have these discussions beyond capacity, which we're fine with.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. And that was my conclusion as well, is we don't really have a capacity issue. What we have here is we need to look at where our gaps are on the affordability side. And I think look at what that gap is and then tease out what are the options for addressing that at the different income levels. And I think that's where it gets very challenging. And particularly as you lay out this on not just a Kenmore siloed, but a broader county and a broader state. Yeah, South King County is doing well on their low income because they have a lot of low income population. That's who lives there. We have the opposite issue. More prosperous people live here and live in more less affordable housing for the lower income. So there are challenges in here if what we're really being asked to do is to shift those numbers in some way. What are options for really doing that? And is that really feasible, or how feasible is it? I think that's the challenge. We've got 20 years to work with, but I think we need to understand, again, what those gaps are, and then what are the options at each one of those income bracket breaks to say, yeah, this is something we could do. This is something that's a 1 to 5 year challenge that could be addressed within 1 to 5 years. This is a 10-year. This is a 20-year. It ain't going to happen unless there's drastic changes in the economy or out there or something else. So that's what I'm looking for, some help with that so we can frame the discussion. I just don't want to get off on a discussion of a particular solution until we understood really what the dimension and what the real problem is.
Right.
Yeah, others have questions or thoughts or things they want to bring up for Lori and Mike here?
I do have a few thoughts. I would agree with what Mike was indicating as issues that relate to us in Kenmore. But to put it into real life, I look at, okay, so what's happening right now? And I look at that 82 or 84 unit development to the west of 68th and trying to figure out how that is zoned properly. But let's forget about that. Let's think about, so I guess the question is out of those 82 or 84 units that are going in there, a huge development, how is that one affecting the affordable housing? How many of those units are really going to be affordable housing, and at what level? Because that's one issue. And two, and I know there's a couple of us are very concerned about environment, because that just completely trashed the environment around and in that whole area. And I'm still not certain of how that development versus environmental protection was balanced out. But with regard to this particular conversation, that is a current a large residential development. How many of those units are really going to be affordable under these definitions? Because that's where we're going, it seems like. And if that's happening, maybe that's not what we should be doing, or we should be looking at preventing that, 84 non-affordable, I don't mean, but you understand what I'm saying, non-affordable units being built. I think we need to look at how this all wraps around when we talk about zoning and other kinds of incentives.
Right. Do you know what the project is or where it is? I'm not sure what project you're talking about.
This is the project that's right near that church off of 68th. And,
yeah, North Kenmore. Yeah.
North
Kenmore. North Lake Lutheran or farther?
Yes. No.
No, it's farther north than that. It's across. I live pretty close to that area. It's off. Gosh, what is it? Maybe 190th and 60th.
190th. That's correct.
Yeah, right there in the corner. And it is. Dwight's right. I walk by there pretty regularly. It's quite striking the size of that development. It's I believe it's townhomes, Lori.
Townhomes. Okay.
Yeah, I believe that's the zoning. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the little 8 unit development next to the substation, the electrical substation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one up by the church.
Okay. All right. I'll look at that. The reason I'm interested in looking at that particular development is that the zoning code currently allows a higher density if you provide affordability. And I don't think that project has affordability in it, but I don't know. I would have to look at the file.
I appreciate
So I
your
thought I
looking
would check
at
that.
it. And I appreciate you looking at it, but there's a lot of folks in the neighborhoods around surrounding that have a lot of questions about that particular development. But the real issue is, you know, to our comments, our discussion tonight is affordability, and putting in an 84 unit or 82 unit development is a big deal in our city, I think.
Right.
I think that
Thank-
discussion really is worth an exclamation point. We spent a lot of time over the last few years looking at zoning and offering all sorts of incentives to encourage developers to develop more density and and giving them more density flexibility in return for developing affordable housing. And here we have a site, which was one of those sites, which we thought we were going to attract some high density, which would include some affordable housing, and we didn't. And we've got a lot of capacity out there we've already designated in the same way. So I think, do we have a problem here? What is realistic? Obviously, we can't force people to develop in a particular way. We can incent them and encourage them. So when we think about how do we achieve these goals, I think we have to get get realistic here and understand really what's an incentive and what isn't an incentive. Why aren't the incentives we put out there already working well? And what would it take for someone to move, for a developer in particular, or a property owner, to move to providing more affordable housing? Why aren't they doing it now? I think we could zone and do all sorts of incentive raising out here, more than what we've done already, and I'm not sure we would get the outcome. I just think we need to have some realistic assessment here as we go forward.
Yeah, I will say that if we are talking about 190th and 68th, that's zone for single family. So there are no incentives, or there's this one very old pre-incorporation incentive that they might have taken advantage of, but otherwise there are no single family incentives to create affordable housing. So I'm going to double check that, but I think that
I
is
see, because it's a
probably-
single family, it's not multifamily. Okay.
No, it's not. It's single
Yeah,
family.
our incentives were all geared to multifamily.
Right. And
Right.
then the other thing that I wanted just to mention, and we'll talk more about this next week, is that you can't build a duplex or a triplex cottage housing under our current rules. You can't build it. So it's hard to know, given the interest in townhomes, which is, you know, no, they're not affordable, but they may be more affordable than a new single family house. If an opportunity were provided, would it be taken advantage of? And I don't know the answer to that.
That's my question. What's going to incentivize the type of development that we need to have if we're going to meet some affordability goals? I think that's an open question.
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
I think this thought is one that came to mind when both Mike and Dwight were talking. And I guess I'll tie into an observation I had about the data that we looked at. And it's you highlighted this, Lori. There are things that popped out at me about the gap we have between people living at between 0 and 30% of AMI and our ability to provide housing for those folks. Like, that's an area that I feel like we need to give attention to. And as Mike says, that's going to be challenging because I don't know that market forces alone will help us there. And then the other thing that I did find very striking is how cost burden households, non-white, you know, people of color are extremely cost burden. There's a huge racial disparity there. It's a huge equity issue that I feel like I'm going to be thinking about when I'm thinking about housing. And I think that missing middle will be an important part of all those conversations. And at the same time, I think to what Dwight is saying, that I would hope that we wouldn't continue these patterns of development as we're trying to solve that problem that have also led us to this kind of suburban sprawl, climate crisis, environmental problem that we have. So like in our effort to create more diversity and equity in our communities through more housing types, I don't I would just despair if we just continued the same harmful patterns of development. And I think that's going to be a real puzzle for us to solve, to try to do things in a new, different way. We don't maybe even know about it yet. Like, what's that way going to look like? I think that's going to be something huge for us to puzzle out. When I see these developments of these houses, that just huge houses that sit on these really teeny tiny lots, I mean, those kinds of developments aren't doing us any favors, even if they add more houses to our community, you know, like environmentally, where people have to get in their car for every trip. And it feels so urgent and important to me that we be thinking about all of these things in parallax, all together in tandem. So I hope we can continue to do that as we talk together as a commission. I keep thinking about Joe Minicozzi's bikes, and I keep wanting to, you know, think about how we can optimize development that creates a financially sustainable community and also an environmentally healthy one.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'll jump in one more time. Another thought that I've had, or I think a layer to this discussion too, is we're in the middle of a silver tsunami right now. And we've already could see in our data how large, particularly the 55 to 65 near-term retirement population is, particularly in Kenmore. And many of those folks are living in single-family neighborhoods right now in single-family homes. I'd be interested, if this exists, if there's some information on what's the next move for these people. How many of them can we expect to want to be age in place, which has some implications? How many may want to stay in Kenmore, but would require a different sort of housing? I guess the better way to ask that question is, if they're going to look for other types of housing, what is it they're looking for, and where are they likely to go? If we're back in my hometown in upstate New York, you're moving south. You're going to Florida. You're not staying in this hometown. You're looking forward to get out. What's the situation here? Is that different? Because I think that over the next 20 years, probably more like next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a significant demographic shift, which is going to drive a significant shift in housing demand and availability, and probably demand for different types of housing. It'd be nice to know what that looks like. I
can tell you that 15 years ago in Kirkland, what it looked like was that Bellevue homeowners were moving to Kirkland condos.
Yep. Why? We've got a lot of folks we know who've done that. We've got several commission members who've done that. So that has, I think, implications for when we look at those gaps and how that capacity shift will happen.
Yeah, the demographic information in the paper that our intern prepared on missing middle housing is really interesting, and I think that will answer that to some degree, but certainly there's more to be looked at.
And the other big demographic shift I think we're also beginning to see when you look at the increase in preschool population, and we think about the millennial generation that is living in 300 square feet downtown today, who are now approaching their 30s and 40s. Are they going to want to stay there? They want to keep their job. Where in the Seattle area do we see lots of people who don't work in their neighborhood looking for neighborhoods where they can raise families? And what does that say about the type of housing demand that might be out there?
Yeah.
Well, I think those are good points, Mike. And to the second one, I think that that's what's going to drive the housing prices up. And because the demand for the single family home for those people who want to get out into this, into the burbs, or where you can have a backyard and a front yard and stuff like that. That's what's, you know, you look at New York and some of those other large metropolitan towns, urban, you know, that's what the ones that want families, they want to move out of the central area. But I wanted to comment about the senior and our senior adults, and what are, are they going to be able to afford to stay in their house or aging in place? And I think that number one, there's a point of how well they did in planning their retirement. And can they afford, have they paid off their house, or can they afford for a little while to finish paying off their house and paying the taxes and other costs that are related to that? But I think, that's pretty straightforward. I think the real kicker here is the services that are required by those individuals. And one of the things that draws people to Kenmore and draws people to Shoreline or Kirkland or wherever is the access to whether it's Meals on Wheels or assisted living, all of those types of issues and needs that are more available in our community than they may be in more rural communities, and how the balance of the cost of housing to the real cost of all of these services and whether they can afford to have those services. And I think that is a big issue as far as the people, seniors having the ability to live in their house or wherever they want to live, is whether they can balance the cost of housing with those needs for their care. And I think that's a big deal as far as a way to answer your question, and that we really need to look at is what is the cost of care, looking at for the different age groups, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, and 80 to 90. And is it reasonable for people to age in place?
So I think that's a key question too, is it's going to be difficult to make Kenmore more affordable as we go over time. So that makes it competitive or non-competitive for certain populations. What percentage of the aging population are going to be able to continue to live here, even those who are fairly prosperous? It'd be more behoove them to move somewhere else. And I think we're seeing that across the country in other areas. So I think just understanding how that plays out, I think changes what our options are for the future. I just myself don't have a clear picture of what those demographic flows look like and what the probability is that the demographic mix will look 20 years from now like it is right now.
Right. I think, at least from a regional policy perspective, all of the documents, Vision 2050, countywide planning policies, et cetera, speak to a diversity of housing types. And the reason they do that is because if your only choices are an apartment downtown or a big house on a big lot, how does that address demographic change? Whereas, is there a role for other kinds of housing? And we've already seen that with townhouses. Man, they are booming in Kenmore. That's kind of a type of missing middle housing. But anyway, the notion that if you have a diversity of housing types, there should be something for folks to find that fits their needs and their lifestyles.
That's the theory.
That's the theory.
Well, I know, one of the options I think that we've talked about and worked on is ADUs. And I was kind of curious in the data here. I didn't see ADUs called out specifically in terms of the total housing units. Mm-hmm. I know you've shared that information. I want to say it's maybe in the low triple figures in terms of the number of known ADUs in Kenmore, is not even that many at this point?
No, I think it was about 50 at the time we did the ADU project. Now, I haven't checked in with Development Services about whether there have been additional units constructed, but we weren't expecting a huge
boom, right? Okay, so that'll always be kind of a minor contributor in a best case scenario to the affordable housing, especially for potentially seniors. I know we talked about multi-generational families taking advantage of that as one option, but so Well, any more questions or thoughts for Mike or Lori on this data? I know we'll use it quite a bit in the future deliberations and including missing middle, I'm sure. So yeah, anything more for this item tonight?
Not from us. We anticipate starting missing middle next Tuesday. Introduction to that topic with some background information. And we'll continue to collect data as it's available. Certainly the commerce numbers are important if we have census data. And I thought I would bundle up the PowerPoint, and I thought it was a kind of a summary of that package of charts you received. So I'll try to include that with your
that would
upcoming materials.
That'd be helpful, Lori.
Lori,
Yeah.
when we start looking at the missing middle, will we have something that'll give us an idea of what the price breakdown would be? You know, if you were to build, starting at some average base property land price in Kenmore today, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, what would that cost look like, and what would be a realistic rental or purchase cost for one of those units?
No, I don't have that information. And I
we
think
need to have that if we're going to address the affordability questions. We won't understand what's affordable without that.
how does that, I'm not sure, affordable to who? Affordable to less than 30%? No, of course not. It won't be. More affordable? Yes, it will be. It would be more affordable than a townhome probably, and more affordable certainly than a single family house. So I'm not quite sure what the level of analysis that would be required to have somebody do a pro forma on a piece of residential property is going to inform us any more than we can already intuit.
Well, I think it would give us an idea of, for instance, for an average development, duplex, triplex, fourplex, what would be the expected mortgage cost for someone if they were purchasing that home, or a realistic rental price. So we understand, are we really achieving, or what level of affordability are we achieving or not achieving by doing this? It doesn't have to be a huge analysis, but I think if we have a pretty good idea of what a lot that would hold a duplex, what that would cost in Kenmore today, or a same for a triplex or a fourplex. Probably fourplex would be the place to start, because that probably has the lowest per unit cost, and get a sense of just what it is we're buying by making these changes.
Well, Commissioner, we can, excuse me, Lori, I'd certainly offer to, do some survey work of the kinds of projects that you're thinking of. More that's been built recently in Bothell, which is a comparable market.
And I was thinking that our development services director is pretty good at he's done some cost estimation, so I could ask him about that as well, so we can get some sort of back of the napkin ideas.
That'd be helpful, Lori and Mike. I mean, are we talking 400,000, 500,000, 600,000? Are we talking affordable at the 80% level, at the 50% level? What does that look like?
Okay, I won't have that for next week, but this discussion will be going on for several meetings. So
understood.
Hey, go ahead, Tracy.
And I hope that we will, in addition to talking about affordability when we're talking about the middle missile, I hope we'll also continue to consider other points. So the missing middle housing, diversifying the types of housing that we allow in single family neighborhoods might not address our, extremely low income affordability crisis, but there could, or our I think there'll be a spread. I think, like Lori says, I think they would create a spread. Like how low down that spread would get, I don't know. But I think there are also other issues that we should consider as well when we're thinking about it, like diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, climate and environment issues. So I hope that we're kind of going to have a really full conversation about these housing types. I think the affordability issue is an important one, but I personally don't want to get stuck on it, because I don't think that's the only issue. So that's one thought. And then the other thing, Lori, I noticed that in the targets and capacity point in the memo, we talked about including the plywood supply property and Lake Point included in our capacity. And I know that we've talked about this before, but could you remind me, do we meet our capacity if we don't consider those properties? Or do we really have to consider those two properties?
So we have to consider at least one of those
Okay.
properties.
Otherwise, we don't meet our capacity. Is that what you're saying?
Otherwise, I don't think we can meet our targets.
I see.
Well, I mean, we could meet them in a different way. We could, if we were, for example, going to do those TOD increased densities, that would be one way.
Okay.
If the commission ends up saying missing middle may be appropriate, that would be another way. So we could make up our capacity, but as it sits right now under current zoning, I don't think we could meet our capacity unless one of those two were to develop over the 20-year period.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything more again for Lori and Mike tonight? All right. I think we're good to go on this agenda item. Lori, I believe that was the last one for tonight, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything more for us tonight from my colleagues or Lori?
Oh, I was supposed to remind all of you, Rita, tell me what it is that is supposed to be filled out. It's some type of a survey or a training or
RSVP for Debbie. It was an original email from Anastasia, the city clerk, to RSVP for a training.
It's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a training that's being offered by a consultant to the council, to the planning commission, and there's going to be trainings for staff as well. So if you haven't responded to the email from the city clerk, please do so as soon as you can.
Go ahead, Tracy. Yeah.
If we have any questions about that, Debbie, should we direct them to Anastasia, or would that be the most appropriate thing to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Otherwise, it gets too many other people in the loop. So I would respond directly to the person that.
Okay.
So I think it was Anastasia.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for that reminder, Lori. Yeah, good. I know that was in our email inboxes, so definitely second that motion. So I think we're done. So we'll see everybody next Tuesday, and this meeting is adjourned. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.